climate change, it's not a problem for future generations. It's a problem for this generation. That's why it is so important that we can adapt our habits to what our planet can give to us, what we can use from our territory.
Time for action is now. Climate change is happening and it's changing the way that we live in the planet. So the way and the moment to act, it is now. We need to mobilize everyone. No one is dismissed from this battle. We need to take concrete measures. A lot of people are already aware of the diagnosis, are already aware of the situation. What we need to be able is to transform this awareness on concrete actions to change and to help leading.
We have to find ways in order to deal with the immediate consequences due to climate change, forest fires, floods, and other natural disasters. And our answer for this immediate consequence is RESC-EU. RESC-EU is our collective response in order to deal with the natural disasters at the European level, and it is a safety net when national capacities and resources are overwhelmed. We don't focus only on equipment, but also on prevention and preparedness.
One of the examples that we are trying to set up is a mission, also in the area of adaptation. We compare it a little bit to the huge challenge that President Kennedy was putting forward like 50 years ago, where he wanted to say, put a man on the moon. And right now we're looking at how to have men and women on a warm Earth by 2030 in a livable way, which should be funded from research and innovation budget from the EU, but where we want to bring in all society, looking at the different angles, be it health, economic opportunities, innovation, and societal transformation.
CO2 release needs to be limited, and we also have to develop technologies to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's very important that everyone rethinks its CO2 footprint. I, for example, came by train from Hamburg to Lisbon. It's doable. But I also think it's important to impact on the industry, on the politicians, that they start rethinking their work life and style of work.
We can change behavior, we can adapt behavior, and I think that the demonstrations that we have seen, whether it's in the United Kingdom, across the EU, there are different ways of raising the alarm or inviting people to action. They all have their place, but time is very much of the essence, and it is important all that come together and there be a real change, particularly to fight fake news. Good morning. Yes, you can applaud that. Good morning. Thank you very much for being up early. And we continue the journey, a journey that was beautifully summarized by that video. And today we're focusing this morning in this plenary, business plenary, of course, on business challenges, business opportunities, and we're going to try and find common ground together. My name is Benedict Pavio. I'll have the pleasure of being the moderator for this session. And really what we're concentrating on is businesses that are at serious risk, as I was saying, because as the climate change impacts our world, it poses really new challenges. So therefore, we need to adapt business behavior and other behavior. And that, we know, has completely changed the environment in which companies operate on a daily basis, basically. But there is good news. The good news is that these risks, if managed properly, can be turned into opportunities. And that's what we're going to be looking at, both here on the stage and also very much looking forward to your questions, your experiences, your contributions. So this will be a very, we hope, interactive session. That'll be the second part after we've heard from the speakers. So we will be looking at generating new services, opening new markets, where only the ones that adapt to climate change will be present. The need for adaptation and the future opportunities can be tackled, but they need to find that common ground. And we very much hope that you will save your questions and that you will help really interact with the speakers who are from very different sectors that has been carefully chosen by the organizers in order to reflect, well, the different world out there. I need to add that, unfortunately, one of the speakers cannot be here, Julien Guerrier. He was due to join us today. Indeed, he had flown from Paris to join us, but he had to suddenly fly back to France, unfortunately, due to a family emergency. By the way, we are aware that some of you were asking, why can't we get more water? But in the bag that you were given at this conference, as you registered in the foyer, there is a bottle in there, you will have noticed. It was empty when you got it, and what we need you to do is to fill it, because Lisbon tap water is actually very good. That bottle is of excellent quality, as is the water in Lisbon, and it's a recyclable bottle, so please do not worry about that. Having said that, you will see no plastic bottles on this stage. Glass is what we've got with us. And really, without further ado, I'd invite you to tweet, of course, messages, because it's important, and there are some people, of course, who haven't been able to be here, either from your groups and your companies, but who would like to be here, and it's good for them, and also other people who follow you throughout the world, to know what's going on here in Lisbon. Of course, the comms team will be endeavoring to publicize that as much as possible, but it's really important that you play your role, both in the questions and also in your raising awareness across your countries, your companies, and your sectors. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Kirsten Dunlop, Paul Fleming, Diane Darras, Alexandra Relevas, and Claudia Coelho to come up on the stage. Please applaud them as they come up. Okay. Excellent. Right, thank you very much. Yes, that is right. That is right. Okay, so we're going to kick off by hearing actually from you, Claudia. And you are from the Sustainable Business Solutions Director of PwC Portugal. And what will be interesting to hear is really about sustainable business. So if you would like to make your way to the lectern, we'd like to hear your presentation. And you'll be concentrating on climate change and the impacts for companies. And I think you're going to make a brief reference to the IPCC report.
Hopefully. Yeah.
And the magic happens.
Okay, good morning to all of you. Let me begin by introducing myself. So I'm Claudia Coelho from PwC Portugal. I'm a director for the Sustainable Solutions. I'm an environmental engineer as a background, and I've been working in environment and sustainability for 19 years. So in PwC Portugal, a firm of the PwC network, we work with mostly big companies, and we do with them analysis that go from the understanding of what's the impact of climate change in their businesses to the development of strategies for adaptation and for taking opportunities. And we also work a lot in supporting these companies to answer to investors, which is something that I'm going to talk a bit. For big companies, this climate change risk necessity of doing an analysis is being mostly driven by investors. And this is something to think about. So let me see if it works. Yes, it does. So beginning with the recognition that climate change is currently, in fact, one of the main risks for businesses. And this has been demonstrated in World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. And each year we see that environmental risks get a significant increase in importance. And this has been completely clear in the in the 2018 report, where we have, I would say, the top two risks are in fact climate change related. And we're talking about extreme weather events and the failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation. Nevertheless, although we have been seeing this report year after year announcing that these are significant and very high risk, what we verify is that climate change is not top concern of corporate directors. So we need to think of how to get the topic into the management of companies before it's too late. Another important document, and I believe this has been discussed in yesterday's session, is the special report published by IPCC on the 1.5 degrees impact. And so this report had an important role in demonstrating what are the impacts of temperatures increases of 2 degrees, which provide a significant alert to companies. The report also had impacts and pathways to 1.5 degrees, and very importantly, all 1.5 pathways imply rapid emissions reduction to net zero. So this means a reduction of 40 to 50% by 2030 and a 70 to 90% reduction by 2050. So it's clear that in order to the world to meet these pathways, we need to make changes. And yet, businesses still don't have this topic in their agenda. So PwC has been doing some follow-up on the transition to a low economy, and we have been publishing a report called Low Carbon Economy Index for the last 10 years. And the purpose of this report is to look at companies, at the economies from the G20, and to track the rate of the carbon transition in each country through an analysis on the carbon intensity of each economy, and compare it with the national targets defined by each of these 20 countries. And so the results are that carbon intensity has been decreasing, but the rate that it's been increasing is not enough. So meaning that we have a 2.6% reduction in carbon intensity that doesn't meet the national targets, which would be 3%, and it's clearly not enough to stay within the 2-degree scenario. So for the 2-degree scenarios, we will need to have a 6.4 carbon intensity reduction through all the century until 2100. So basically, the bad news about this analysis are that it's very difficult to comply with the Paris Agreement. So something needs to change, and we know that technology already exists in most cases. So it's just about taking it to a next level, taking it to action. So we have also made some analysis on the increase of renewables energy, for example, which has been growing rapidly with an increase of 70%, in particular in solar, with the fastest growing energy with an overall rate of 35%, and in particular in some countries like India and China. So these are good news, and I think that investments and commitments have been done in order to increase the renewable energy. And we also have looked at how other technologies like autonomous electric vehicles can change. So we have made a study, and it's interesting that if we would make a quick transition for autonomous electric vehicles, we could achieve 1/3 of the gap in emissions that we need to achieve. So it's just one more data, one more information that really confirms that technology exists and can do the change. We have also made some studies on the impact of blockchain and artificial intelligence, for example, on the transition to low carbon economy. So climate change is a material risk for financial stability. This is something that I think governments have understood, investors have understood. I would like to talk a bit about the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is the result of an initiative by the G20 that aims to put in the financial report information on the financial impacts of climate change for companies. And for us as a consultant, I must say, this type of regulation, which is going to be a regulation, for now it's voluntary, is a different language, because we have been talking about climate change with the people from sustainability areas. And people from sustainability have sometimes, or most of the times, more honestly, a difficult time in trying to demonstrate their companies and their management that this is going to be big, that this is relevant, and this is a topic for today and not a topic to be postponed continuously, because there's always something more important than climate change in the management agenda. And so what we see is that this is a different language. This is financials to financials. And so I think this steps up the discussion. And we have seen, at least in Portugal, that companies have been receiving signs from their investors saying, we expect you to report on this. We expect you to tell us what are the impacts of climate change in your business. But this is difficult. This is not something so easy to do. I would just like to make here a reference to this task force, that it was developed by a group of 32 members. It included someone from PwC, a partner from John Williams from PwC UK, but most importantly, it was chaired by Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England. So I would like to quote him. So he says that, as financial policymakers and prudential supervisors, we cannot ignore the obvious physical risks before our eyes. So I think this is very important, because we have a governor of the Bank of England saying that this is a top topic, and I think this is the type of message that really comes from someone that has the power to influence the way we think about climate change. Also, a quick reference to the Sustainable Finance Action Plan from Europe, which includes a package of measures that basically aim to get the financial sector aligned with climate change. We also expect this to be a significant driver for the transition to a low carbon economy, sorry. So regarding TCFD, I'm not going to go into detail, but basically TCFD is a guideline, let's say, for how to integrate climate change risk into a company. And it defines, what needs to be done and communicated in terms of governance, what needs to be communicated in terms of strategy, How does the company address climate-related risks and opportunity on businesses? Also disclose how the company assesses and manages the climate-related risks, and also some metrics and targets used to communicate on this. So this is quite challenging because this means that climate change needs to be integrated in a company's management from the risk analysis part. And one of the main challenges of this risk analysis is the definition of climate change scenarios and the evaluation of its financial impacts on the company business. So the TCFD has one specific recommendation that says that the company needs to understand and describe the resilience of the organization's strategy, taking into consideration different climate-related scenarios. So this is really challenging for companies because in order to get to a number of what's the risk in terms of financials, you need to have scenarios, you need to develop analysis to simulate the impact of those scenarios in your business. And this is something that we have been starting to do with some companies, in particular for financial institutions and investors, for example, where we can identify the risk hotspots in their portfolio, where they have significant credit exposure. And so it's a good tool to track and manage the portfolio. We can also see some examples from Diageo, for example, that they have identified water-stressed areas, and it's a good example of how to think of sustainability in your sector. So basically the type of rationale that needs to be done is to define a scenario, to define the attributes that you need to study, and what are the impacts of climate change in terms of sales, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of raw material prices, and then in the financial part, what's the impact on turnover and cost of sales. So this is translating into financials the climate change impact. And this is a language that management of companies do understand. So just to finish, because I suppose my time is gone, I would just like to identify three changes that we as PwC identified that are necessary in order for this to effectively be integrated in a company, which is number one, climate governance and climate competent boards. So we need to take the subject to the board. The board needs to understand its importance. There's a recent publication from World Economic Forum in cooperation with PwC that is like a guide with principles for effective climate governance. Then we have a second area that needs to be developed, which is climate change scenarios and risk assessment, and basically to take all the risks and opportunities of climate change into the business. And then the challenge of disclosure and communication on this financial impact as a requirement that is going to be legal, at least for listed companies. And so this is it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we'll be discussing a bit of that later, but I'd like to move to another sector, the agriculture sector. Alexandra, thank you, Relvas, for making your way to the lectern. So you're managing director of Casa Relvas, and so let's turn to, we're in wine country, of course, in Portugal. Let's turn to the impact on the wine sector.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit in a different way, in the way our family, our company is managing the water in our business, which is mainly the vineyard and winemaking business. Casa Relvas, it's a multi-generational family-owned and managed agriculture company, which is based in Alentejo. How there's a lot of people that is not very used to know the Portuguese geography. Alentejo means under the Tagus River, and it's a region that is around 30% of Portuguese area, goes from the other side of the river we have here until the Algarve, and it goes from the sea to Spain. So it's a big area of Portugal, and it's one of the areas who had suffered more with these climate changes or strange climates or whatever you want that we have faced the last years. So in Alentejo, it's a region where we have, in average for the last 20 years, 600 milliliters of rain. But on the last years, we had faced very long droughts. So we just come out from a drought that we had during 3 years. And in a year of drought, we had around 200 millimeters, 250 millimeters per year. And when I talk drought, it's not only drought for animals and for agriculture. It's a drought that some of the villages had, like in California, water just for 4 hours per day, on the morning and on the evening. And even on the years we have a lot of rain, which is not a lot, it's 600 millimeters, we have a problem because 80% of the rain happens in less than 20 days. So we have heavy rains, and the region now we are equipped, if you want, to have water walls to stock water, not only for agriculture and for biodiversity. So, beginning on the vineyard, just a few numbers. 1 hectare of vineyard, which is around 3,000 to 4,000 plants, produce 8,000 bottles of wine. And we need 1,500 cubic meters for irrigation. Sorry, that's a mistake there. So nowadays, our company began to make some studies and put in place for the last 10 years a lot of rules and a lot of the best practice in agriculture, like the have an efficient use of water resources. The efficient use of water resources, it's a kind of a certification that make us go a little bit back and analyze the soils and the plants to use only the water we need. And we do that with humidity probes, measuring hydric potential on the plants, just to have the irrigation the plants really need. And also very important thing that on my activity is that even you have a lot of technology, our eyes, they see things on the plants that the technology could not give us. So human and the technology together on the vineyards, they can help us a lot to decrease the quantity of water spoiled. And for the future on viticulture, for us, there's 2 major opportunities. And one of the opportunity is having more technology. Nowadays, companies like IBM, they have in California a big trial with the Gallo family, which is the biggest family-owned wine company in the world, where they have a lot of technology from the cloud, and then they have measurements of the needings of each plant. So when you have a water tube, you have different kind of drips, like intelligent drips that only let the water enough for that plant to get out. They are a little bit on the front, but I think it's on the future we should be more on that side. And another thing that is a lot discussing nowadays, also because the organic farming and sustainable farming, is that if we increase the yields per hectare, you will need to irrigate less hectares of vineyards to produce the same amount of grapes. So we need to increase our yields, maintaining the quality. And then on the winery, we talking a winery. We never call a winery a factory, because on the wine we always have a lot of glamour around the things. But on the winery, we cannot forget we're talking about food. Wine is food. So we need to clean a lot our cellars to make sure that we don't have microorganisms, bacteria and problems. So, sorry, this is not my final presentation, but 1 liter of wine needs, in average, around 7 liters of water to be produced. In Casa Relvas, we were on the average in Alentejo, and in a few years, in 3 years, we dropped from 6 to 3, just with very small, I would say, like stupid things on our day by day. And after we decreased to 3, and we want to decrease more, we make 6 million bottles per year, so we still use a lot of water. So we thought what we should do to take care of all this water we use to clean the bottling machine, the vats, the everything. So together with Water from Alentejo Association, we had built a water treatment system that recycle all the water we use, but also from the small village next to us, and we use that water, all is used for irrigation. And with all the water we have, in our family we have 250 hectares of vineyard, and with the water we use on the winery, recycled, of course we make a lot of analyses, I think every second week, to see the quality of the water, to be sure that the water is in good quality to spread again on the nature. We can irrigate 10 hectares of vineyards only with the water which is used on the winery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wow. And of course, you've been talking, thank you so much for that presentation. I think I personally learned a lot, and I think everybody here, possibly on the stage, but certainly in the room. So since you talked also a lot about water, let's talk to a woman who knows an awful lot about water. She's sitting next to me, Diane Darras, you're president of the International Water Association. So from a water sector perspective, new technologies is one of the many areas. There are others.
Thank you very much for being able to speak. I would like to start, well, I hope my presentation is coming. Well, I have no presentation.
It's going to come, I hope.
Well, first, I would like to present IWA. Maybe.
Well, I'm not going to do better than you.
Thanks. So
we had ignition.
It's going a bit too quick. Okay, thank you. So, first, I would like to remind what is IWA, International Water Association. It's a big water association which is dealing mainly on the service. Our members are either researchers, but also lots of people coming from utilities or regulators. And the objective of those members are mainly to distribute, to make the service, to distribute water to utilities or to develop technology. So we are really focusing on cities or in village, but delivering water at home, so and in industry. So we don't discuss a lot about agriculture. I mean, we focus on the service. And IWA is international, but our historical members are in Europe. We have lots of members in Europe, and of course, most of them are also dealing with the challenge in Europe. We are a British charity, but our head office in The Hague. So we are a global network of water professionals. I would like to come back again on the challenge of climate change for the professional water professional. Of course, we more and more know that there will be an increase of temperature. I've seen that up to now, that is what would be the impact with 2 degrees. Of course, we would like to stick to 1.5 because the impact would be less, because we more or less know that there will be a big impact on the weather. What is interesting is to remind that 2 degrees is an average on the globe. That means some regions in the world would have much more, and an average during the year. So that's mean that it is a lot, because you could be much more at certain part and so on. What we don't know so well, and it's a real problem for water professional, is what would be really the pattern of the changes. What will happen really? Will we have much more water, much less water? It's still quite challenging to understand and to predict. And of course, you can predict more or less on a zone, but when you start to look at more detail, it becomes very complex. And people need to know, because water is used locally, and there is no lots of transport of water. So it could be worrying. What we see is that, yes, climate change is a reality, and for water professionals, we have to face flows. And in the cities, when you have that, of course, you have to manage your wastewater, your pipes under water, too much water. So it's a big risk, but it's a reality. We know that. And of course, also that we have lack of water. So we are on both sides. Too much water sometimes, not enough in many times. I would like just to remind also a bit what it means, where would be some lack of water. That is a map of the difficulties. I put the map in cubic meter per day per people, which is a number that everyone can understand. What does it mean to have water, the renewable water, around 4 cubic meter per day, which is in the middle. 4 cubic meter per day, 4,000 liters per day per person is a lot. I don't want to receive that on my head. It's a very... So it's strange, because you speak about lack of water, but it's still a lot. And it is interesting to understand that figures and that order of magnitude. The main reason for considering that under 4 is a problem is because of agriculture. As you have shown, agriculture needs a lot of water, and because it's irrigation, natural irrigation, or artificial irrigation. Natural meaning you have the rain and you deliver. So the main reason for water is agriculture, and of course we need it. We need it for eating. So every person needs to eat, and more or less when you eat, you use 3 cubic meter per day per person for eating. The rest is for industry, the rest is for service. So in the water distribution, we need, I would say, 200 liters per day per person. So we need not so much. So what is important for us is to understand that the challenge for water professional is clearly, the first is resilience. We need to be able to deliver service even if there would be less water. The second challenge, is the doesn't come back. Yeah. The second challenge is the wastewater treatment, because if you have less water, you really need to treat, and we still have in Europe a challenge on wastewater. And of course, the third challenge is to give to everybody, because we understand that climate change will affect more some zones, which are not the I would say, which are already the poorest. So how do we keep that? So we have 3 big challenges in the profession. Can I have the next slide, please? It doesn't seem to work. Can you give me the next slide, please? Oh, technology. IT system.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's the competitors. Maybe that's why. Okay, so I need to... Is it possible to have my slides?
Somebody's trying to... No, I don't think so. Yes.
Okay, and then when it comes, it's come too much. Okay. Okay.
It's like sometimes the rain.
Yeah, I was recently.
You go from drought to.
I was recently in
you
Uganda.
got to manage technology.
Exactly, it's to try. So strategy. From a strategy point of view, IWA really work in trying to put market and techno together. Main user of water are utilities, industry, and consumer. And we need really to put together the technology, because there are lots of offer, there are lots of technology, but there is a lack of connection between the end users, being the utilities or the industry, and the consumer. So we really need to put them, and it's really the objective of IWA, to help connecting technology and people using them. And in three big aspects, we need infrastructure. Infrastructure is a need in Europe. So it means that we need to find the way to finance infrastructure. When you have a lack of wastewater treatment, you need to invest. We need to have a more pushy infrastructure policy, helping utilities and cities to have that possibility. The second big, and it will be commented later on, is of course we have the advantage now to have digital technology, and it will help connecting people in the day-to-day. We can be much more clever, much more resilient if we are able to use that technology. It's really a big focus, and IWA is focusing on how digital can help to be much more efficient and resilient. And the third is green technology. We understand that we can have nature-based technology. So there is three axes of strategy. The second big push is, as I said, utilities are the public or private, are the one who delivers service. So we need to help them to develop their strategy and to be more efficient. So IWA has did a vision on water-wise cities with 17 principles, and we push utilities to sign it, to look at it, to agree with the principle. That doesn't mean that the day after they do everything, but at least to look at the principle. And we have lots and lots now of cities which are signing and developing. We are going to sign in Berlin next week, I think, and we have been developing in many. And cities look at it and say, okay, I signed the principle, I want to go that way, and I'm ready to so it's a kind of vision which helps cities and utilities to develop and to be more water-wise. We don't say, we just say, well, how can you manage in a world where water will be more expensive, more difficult, and you will have to share it. So it's water-wise. You can find it on the internet, and you will find in English, in French, in Portuguese, in Spanish, in Chinese, in Romanian. I mean, our governing members have been translating in order that everybody can connect. So do use it. Last, what are the opportunities? In the water-wise, we have, in fact, 17 principles, but we have, I would say, 5 main R's. They are this, where should we work? Where can we really have some opportunities to be more efficient and to develop? And here are the 5 R's, which are not so difficult to remind. Replenish water bodies. We have the obligation to bring back water after use on a good way. It has to go back to river, because if you put back water which is not well treated, you destroyed the water you have, in fact. You can't use it afterwards. So replenish water bodies is absolutely a key, and I've shown before very quickly, but wastewater treatments need still to be developed in Europe. So replenish the water bodies. There are technology and there is opportunities and infrastructure to do. Reduce the amounts of water energy used. I think you have spoken about reducing water. Reducing the consumption is something we can do, and I will come back on that. Reuse, of course, is very important, because a part of the water you use can be reused on another. For example, you reuse the water you are using for the bottles, and then you can use in irrigation. And Europe is pushing a specific topic on reuse. It's clear that it is important. Of course, it has to be fit for purpose. It's better to reuse wastewater which come from utility in irrigation or in industry, rather than to drink it back. So it's fit for purpose. So it's very important. And there are lots of technology and opportunities in technologies. Recover energy, and of course it's also because we need to work also on reducing CO2. So reducing and recovering energy. And recycling, of course, there are some possibility inside the wastewater, and we can use it. I would, just before finishing, go back a bit on reduce. Reduce is probably something which is key to remind, because before reusing, before recycling, I think the first reflex should say, do I need so much water, or can I be very happy with less water? So in fact, even if Europe has shown that we don't use so much water at home, I mean, we are quite prudent now. It's the order of magnitude in Europe is 150 liters per day, when sometimes in the United States you still have 400 liters per day, or even worse.
Wow.
Okay? Yeah. So I think Europe has shown to be already a bit in that way. But you can go much further. In fact, you can be very happy with less water. And for example, if you reduce your shower time and you can be quick, I mean, you reduce water and you reduce the hot water, mainly. So you reduce both water and energy. So I think giving the possibility to consumer to be much more wise, to be understanding, but not forcing. It should be just giving the information so that they can be wise and they can adapt. I think it is very important. What is difficult is, as I said, that utilities are really the main, I think, target for developing a good policy. Utilities up to now are, their revenue are on the volume of water they distribute. So even if they are very good and they want to develop, it's sometimes difficult for them to say, okay, I'm going to help people to reduce my consumption, but that means that if I need to survive, I will have to increase my price, because 70% of the cost of water is fixed. So if you reduce volume. So it's a quite of difficulties, and I think IW really want to push and help, and probably regulation and politics can help. But it will be challenging, because it's not so evident in a business manner to reduce water. So it's a bit difficult, but we need to push, and IW will push on that. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. It works when he wants. Maybe with you. Be careful.
Thank you for that really enlightening talk. And I think the aspect of wisdom, being wise as opposed to being repressive and coercive, is a very interesting approach, and I think we'll probably most likely come back to that. Now for something very different. Paul Fleming, who's gone to the lectern, and you're from Microsoft, Paul, and you hail from the United States. It's interesting to get also different perspectives from that point of view as well. And you're going to focus more around the opportunities and how that technology can help us with.
Yep, great, thank you. I want to say it's a great honor to be in this just beautiful city of Lisboa. It's the third time here, and I just pinch myself every time I get to come back to this wonderful city. And also wanted to thank Mario, Mark, and Rafaela for their organization and leadership, both with respect to the Horizon 2020 projects that they lead, as well as to organizing this important event. In addition to talking about the risks and opportunities, I'm probably going to focus mostly on the responsibilities of the business sector as it relates to climate change, and hopefully weave together both the opportunities and the responsibilities. So with Microsoft, it's important to start off with our mission. And our mission is about empowering every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And so our success as a company is tied directly to the success and of the people we work with, the customers, the companies. And so we view customers as central to achieving what we want to achieve, that we achieve our success through your success. As that relates to environmental sustainability, there's sort of three areas where we focus and attempt to achieve that mission. I'm going to focus in this presentation primarily on the second one of enabling technology innovation. Won't talk as much about influencing policy outcomes, but that is an area that we're very active in, and as I think you all know, in the United States, it's an area where the business sector needs to step up, given what's happening with our federal government. But before I dive into the second one, I just want to talk really quickly about how we approach sustainability within our operations. Since 2012, we have levied an internal carbon fee on the businesses across the company and have used the revenue from that fee to fund our environmental sustainability program. It has enabled us to be carbon neutral since 2012, to invest in renewable energy projects around the world, and also to invest in carbon offset projects in 30 different countries around the world. Diane mentioned water replenishment as one of the first principles under their IWA's WaterWise program. I've had the good fortune of joining Microsoft recently and am standing up a corporate water stewardship program that includes replenishment activities that is funded through our internal carbon fee. And we have supported 8 projects over the past 9 months around the world, again, focused on helping to alleviate and improve water conditions in the areas where we operate in water-stressed areas around the world. And we'll continue to do that with the goal of balancing our consumption in those areas by 2030. So I'm going to pivot now to talk a bit about technology and the role of technology and how we view technology as a tool, not the tool, but a tool in helping to address climate change and the other environmental challenges before us. A sister program to our environmental sustainability program is AI for Earth. It's a 5-year, $50 million commitment that is focused on, in a similar fashion to our mission statement, empowering people and organizations, NGOs, startups, academia, to create breakthrough innovations in the use of data science to help solve environmental challenges. AI for Earth really represents and is at the intersection of sort of two areas of science. On one hand, we have environmental science. Many of you are environmental scientists, and we've obviously made a lot of progress in understanding the nature of the environment, ecology, and how these systems function. We've also collected and continue to collect mounds and mounds of environmental data. In some places, there are big data gaps, but in many places, we don't suffer from a lack of data. We maybe suffer from the ability to generate insights from that data. On the other hand, we have computer and data science that is set up to harness the power of data and to generate insights from data. And so AI for Earth is an attempt to marry those two arenas of science and enable, again, organizations to really harness the data that they're gathering and make their work more efficient and powerful and effective. There's 4 focus areas within the AI for Earth program: agriculture, water, biodiversity, and climate change. And the way the program is set up is it's a grant program. So we provide a variety of different grants, from access to the cloud. Alexander was talking about the use of the cloud in the Gallo winery in California, to helping organizations label their data and expedite the process that they're engaged in to achieve their mission. We have 380 grantees from around the world. 66 countries host a grantee that has participated in this program. You'll see here that Europe has 62 of them. I don't know if any of you are in the audience. I think there may be someone from Deltares here. They're one of the grantees we've worked with. And I would really, if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk to you about this and encourage you to consider applying to this program if you face challenges around using your data, making it work for you so you're not working for the data, and are looking for opportunities to generate more insights. I often say that we are in some ways in a fog of data, and we need more lighthouses to help us navigate and figure out a course forward amongst that fog of data. And I think AI for Earth represents an opportunity to build some of those lighthouses. I'm going to pivot now to another study that we did in collaboration with Claudia's colleagues at PwC in the UK. And it's focused more broadly on the role of AI in creating a sustainable future. And there are really two themes here that the report focuses on. Two sort of trends that haven't really been thought about very much in tandem with one another. One is the digitalization of society, which Diane mentioned, as did Alexander, as well as the need to decarbonize society. And how can those two trends and themes work together? It's really looking at also at the overlap of the emergence of AI and the Anthropocene. We're a generation that's going to feel the effects of climate change, and we're also going to be a society that's going to witness the massive transformation of society through AI, digitalization, and robotics. And so we wanted to step back and understand what are the opportunities and challenges associated with deploying technology to address decarbonization. We are, of course, a technology company, but we view AI not as the tool, not as the panacea or a magic wand, but a tool. And it's one that needs to be deployed with a lot of thought and foresight and responsibility. And it requires not just technology providers, but it requires ethical considerations. It also requires exploring new legal frameworks and policy frameworks. So we looked at four sectors in the economy that are primed to deploy AI and that could also accelerate the decarbonization that's needed. Those sectors are agriculture, energy, transport, and water. And we looked at both the sort of pace and speed of adoption that's needed and the effects on both the environment as well as GDP and labor. There's rightfully concerns about the role that AI can play in automating jobs, and so we wanted to explore what some of those implications could be. Some of the top line results is that the application of AI in these environmental domains could actually boost GDP while reducing emissions. So the opportunity to sort of decouple economic growth from emissions. That there's a significant productivity benefit associated with AI, that the emission reductions could total the current emissions of Australia, Canada, and Japan by 2030. Again, it's not a panacea, but it potentially could be another tool that we should be exploring as we assemble a portfolio of approaches to decarbonize. And also, with respect to the jobs, that there is actually an opportunity to create a range of net new jobs with respect to the deployment of AI. That will require both training so that there's the workforce that's able to capitalize and fill those jobs. And it also requires an inclusive approach so that the regions of the world that are already on the forefront of technology, be it the North America, Europe, East Asia, are not the only winners in this arena, that we need to ensure that everyone is included in the benefits of the deployment of AI. So that's just a quick overview of how we're looking at the role of technology in addressing climate change and the other challenges before us. Both we have our own internal operational approach to reducing our impact focused on enabling other organizations through our AI for Earth program. And we do see promise of deploying AI and similar data science approaches in addressing some of these challenges. But we need to approach that with a responsible lens and make sure that the ethical and legal and policy and human implications are at the forefront of any deployment of these technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And now to you, Kirsten Dunlop. You are Chief Executive Officer at Climate Kick. You're going to talk to us about barriers for innovation to adaptation and core business transformation.
Thank you very much, Benedicte. Hello, everybody. So let me say a couple of words about Climate Kick. We are a member of the EIT family, the European Institute of Innovation of Technology, as you may know, one of the first knowledge innovation communities to be established within the EIT. And therefore, we are both a business and an instrument for and of the Commission on behalf of the needs of industry and businesses of the broadest sense, from industry, large-scale industry across Europe, but also small and medium enterprises, cities, regional governments, also looking to understand how they manage their environments in ways that are well stewarded, well governed, and at the same time informed by the entrepreneurship, adaptation, and renewal that every business needs. So what I'm going to say is just a couple of words, perhaps thinking also and connecting back to the framing that Benedicte gave of this panel at the beginning, around the risk that climate represents and the opportunity to business and the challenge around adaptation and renewal, which is a challenge of both stewardship and entrepreneurship. So I'm speaking from both Climate Kick itself as a business. The Kicks are independent entities and have a set of expectations to be effective in the way in which we catalyze and mobilize support for transformation through innovation, and we serve businesses. When it comes to climate, our core purpose, I think the most effective frame to bring in, to add into the mix that you heard from Claudia, is strategic risk. This is very definitely about financial costs. It is about transition costs, the challenges of stranded assets. If you think, I was on a panel recently launching the UN Global Risk Assessment Framework, and one of the topics of conversation was that the most significant stranded assets we will deal with in the coming decades are our cities. The cities that are abandoned because they are unlivable as a result of water or heat, and many other climate change, early onset climate change effects. So thinking about transition risk, thinking about regulatory risk, the risk of a world in which the laws change and the expectations to comply, either with an expectation of responsibility or simply just a growing concern about the needs to adapt behaviors in ways that are more and more stringent. Strategic risk is very much around the core business model, identity, and sense of being that a business brings to life. Its sense of purpose and identity as an agent looking to maximize its outcomes in the world and meet and understand needs. Thinking about climate change as a strategic risk challenges you to think about the underpinning assumptions about your business model and your business identity, the needs it serves and the way in which those needs adapt and change. And that means it is essential to think about how to use innovation, and particularly strategic innovation, as a way of understanding that risk, adapting to it, and transforming a business model and a business identity so that you are more coherent, so that we can be more coherent with the emerging conditions of the world in which we are operating. A world in which climate change effects are changing the physical environment in which we operate, and most importantly, the social environment in which we operate. and a world in which there is a convergence and an acceleration of efforts to deploy different business models and technologies to increasingly prevent and mitigate. So it's an interesting spectrum from adaptation to prevention, and essential to consider them as intrinsically linked, and to think about the pivoting of business models, core business models, in almost all industries, from business models that are optimized for fast-paced reaction or just-in-time delivery, to business models that are optimized for anticipation, redundancy, resilience, and prevention. And in some industries, that is the essential business model pivot. For example, in the insurance industry, a pivot from fixing stuff when it's broken to preventing it or mitigating or reducing and anticipating the underlying risk. And that's where the role of an organization like Climate King comes in. We have had to change our entire business model in response to the accelerating concerns around climate change, the beginnings of a realization, particularly in reference to the IPCC 1.5 degree report, that we simply cannot keep doing more of the same. We cannot have another 10 years of being the kind of instrument that we have been for the next 10 years, particularly the next 10 to 12. So we have pivoted our entire business model from a focus on the supply of multiple bright, shiny innovation solutions to market, thousands of startups, educated entrepreneurs, single-point solutions, predominantly because of the inbuilt and inherent needs of public funding, predominantly incremental, and shifted our business model to a focus very deliberately on catalyzing systemic change, deploying innovation differently to be able to enable and unlock breakthrough alternatives, and most importantly, unlock innovation or deploy innovation in such a way as that it can catalyze reactions, creative collisions, and interdependent transformations across the whole system of food, energy, mobility, waste, water, landscapes, farming, core materials, and so on. We need systems transformations that are about the relationships and interfaces as much as they are about the single solutions. Examples of the way in which we are working on that, and particularly the way we're trying to help individual businesses or find solutions that will help a collection of industries work together and work together with cities and regions. There are many in nature-based solutions, particularly solutions like Pole de Roof or something called Blue Blocks, which combines aquifer collection, biofiltration, rainwater collection, storage, management, reuse, and layers that into the physical infrastructure of cities or homes, individual homes, commercial buildings, and whole city infrastructures, so that excess water can be reused, can be captured in a way that's safe, and then reused in times of difficulty and water shortage. Much more complex engagements in agriculture, for particularly, we run a program called Winners, which has just taken on a significant injection of scaling funding from the African Development Bank and the Climate Justice Resilience Foundation, which is supporting thousands of farmers in sub-Saharan Africa to implement climate-smart agricultural solutions that are a combination of artificial intelligence, satellite information, the latest technology, sensor technology and information technology around where and how to plant, particularly with respect to humidification, water, and climate and weather predictions, but also seed, and a much more resilient seed. And then bringing that into a financial system, which is about a line of credit and the risk of that line of credit being taken away from the farmers and secured by an insurance mechanism that is spread back over a series of other actors who benefit from the underlying resilience, improvements in the underlying resilience and the flattening of volatility of productivity across the whole region, and secured by offtake agreements with European supermarkets, because the reduced volatility is worth millions. So there's a particularly interesting set of initiatives emerging around the combination of technologies, practical solutions, better knowledge and understanding, community, particularly distributed production across smallholding, secured and enabled by financial innovation. I think where I'll finish is we are seeking now as a business and in support of other businesses to extend what we're doing into a full build of working from the problems, the transformations we know we will need to make, the kinds of adjustments, both adaptation of business models, if we think about one in particular of our deep demonstration relationships with the Mondragon Valley, through to preparation and adaptation around changed climatic conditions, and creating a mechanism whereby we can use innovation deliberately, systemically, and systematically through a portfolio approach to test and identify multiple solutions working in parallel, in concert, different solutions, pull them together into a system of interactions that enable the adaptation and resilience and renewal of core business models into a different set of services. And one, I think, most interesting reflection to think about as we then open up to conversation, climate change onset is going to be the point at which people recognize the reality of climate change as a much bigger problem. Preparation for climate change onset, adaptation technologies, adaptation business models, adaptation implementation, even from the simple mechanisms around light switches to the more complicated visible mechanisms around water management, agricultural management, begin to create a layering of understanding, of expectation and adjustment, moral switches around a sense of what's right and what's wrong, such as we're beginning to see and we need to make happen with water. And therefore, I think it's essential to think not only of business in terms of the financial or technical risk, but also the role that business has to play in preparing and identifying the social vulnerabilities, the social concerns of climate change, and beginning to raise awareness and open up an awareness about the significant opportunities in building new business models and building new market structures around climate adaptation services, climate prevention, climate change mitigation services, and the whole suite of adaptation prevention. And that's really where the role of industry as community citizens beginning to both demonstrate what's possible, but also raise awareness of what is needed in individual behaviors all the way through to supply chain and value chain and industry behaviors. And that's very much what we're about. And it's an extraordinary journey. We've just launched a program called Deep Demonstrations, which are explicitly calling for innovation actors, problem owners, industries, and businesses keen to anticipate and take a long and not so early, but a long position in the new emerging economies of adaptation, of resilience, of prevention, and of climate change mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Kirsten. And I think some of the words that have been coming up again and again are this pivoting, also the financing aspect, the difference in the business models. I thought the business identity was also, and of course, all this adaptation and preparation. And before we go to your questions from the hall, really, I'd like to hear about reactions to each other's presentations. Diane, maybe talking about pivoting and preparation, I thought it was very interesting about also, cities that will become unlivable. That's the reality.
It's clear that cities have a very strong, I think, responsibility in the fact that if they move, if they do what they should do, they can help a lot. I mean, because people are living more and more in cities, they can have a stronger impact. So it's why it's very interesting to have that link between the politics and the big utilities in order for water, for example, to really help taking the right decision. As it has been said, I said it, but it was repeat, the business model has to change. Sometimes it's difficult even in water to say that there is a business. People like to say, no, it's God, so we have some difficulties. But it just means that people need to have water and to use it the right way. So there is a challenge for cities, and I do agree cities are key for that.
Just a little window there in my brain went off about, you said it as a passing remark, but that's a very important belief. The belief that some people think that it's God. Because we talk about technology, we talk about theory, we talk about the legal aspect, etc. But people's inherent cultural beliefs, I don't think that's come up yet, and I just want to identify that as something that also needs to be included. We're talking about a planet, pollution, adaptation, mitigation, innovation, all those things, and beliefs. Because, of course, what needs to happen is it needs to be done with the consent and the help and the collaboration, not of just, the people present here and who are aware of it, but helping to raise that awareness in a consensual way. Sometimes it needs to be more strongly. Alexandra, I'm fascinated. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm delighted the organizers. It must have been a bit daunting for you. You think, okay, and I thought your presentation was extremely clear. What are some of the thoughts that are going through your mind as you hear the different reflections and perspectives? What are you going to take away from this conversation?
That's a quite hard question. I think it's very interesting here in that presentation to see
the water.
The water. We in Alentejo we are very concerned about the water, because I think the temperature it's something very important, of course. But in our case, in our everyday, the water is the most that every day we think about the water, and
you must worry about it a lot.
And so in those two ladies' conversations was 2 points which one is scaring me a lot, which are the desert cities, because we already felt like 2 years ago a few cities with water for 2 hours a day.
Wow.
And
so only 2 hours, 22 hours without water.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours on the south. So
I see.
20 hours. And then it's, and we saw in Portugal a lot of cities which, like Viseu, which is a quite big city, receiving water in trucks.
In trucks?
Which is not possible in the future, and it's nice to see also the quantity of water we consume as humans to feed ourselves, and we need to think a lot about that. And in agriculture, we should be more precise and increase our yields to have less impact on our planet.
Yeah, you wanted to pick up on that, Gaston?
I was just going to pick up on the cities as well. I think the flip side of a huge risk is that it's a massive concentration risk, is that it's also the only chance we have of adaptation. Because if you think about the human population, if we distribute ourselves very widely, if we flee, then we have much less opportunity for the economies of scale in the way in which we do husband resources and use them very, very carefully. And it goes to your point on precision. Cities also give us the greatest opportunity to concentrate the ability of technology to help us use resources very, very effectively in kind of densely concentrated, precise ways. And it's the same in terms of the agricultural practice. In fact, no, the agricultural practice is almost the opposite. Can you go right down to the micro collection, micro precision, micro management, keep humans in cities and agriculture in the opposite way?
You wanted to pick up on that?
I'll just echo, I think that you have organizations like C40, which is a collection of the 40 largest cities in the world that have committed to focus on climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. I think it's true that concentrations of people obviously can have some issues, but it's also where innovation tends to occur, right? Through that concentration of human capital and other forms of capital that can drive innovation. So I think cities are crucial for solving this issue.
And there's no doubt that across the planet there is a growing phenomenon of urbanization.
Yep.
To come back to your presentation, Claudia, about governance, this is also a very important aspect of helping and preparing the future. How do we improve on that?
Okay,
on boards?
I would like to pick up on the point that you were mentioning about behavior or culture, and take it also to governance level.
Okay.
So I was thinking that the same way as we and the society as consumers are definitely more aware to those aspects, we can also see that on the boards of companies. So, in a survey that PwC does to CEOs, which is called PwC CEO Survey, we have been asking them about what's their purpose. And it's interesting to see that more and more the purpose of a CEO is to not only address shareholders' expectation, but to address the society and the rest of the stakeholders' expectations. And I think this might be a good driver for change, because this means that a CEO starts to integrate in this decision process the values of society, the needs of society. So I think that's one step. And then I would also like maybe to mention the WEF study on governance that I was mentioning on the presentation, which is worth looking at in terms of the principles for integration of climate change in governance in a more theoretical way, of course, but it's a step-by-step guide on how to integrate, and it goes from defining attributing responsibilities, meaning saying that you are responsible for considering climate change, and this being a requirement of the board, and then to have the necessary skills and understanding, to have the necessary incentives, meaning that a board can and should answer in terms of performance also for non-financial aspects, and so on. So,
okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and we'd very much like to get to your questions. So do put your hands up, and I will try and go across the hall. So do I see any hands? There are some roving mics and two ladies with the roving mics. Do I see any hands? I see a hand over there. That gentleman. And where? Or else? Oh, yes. So there's a gentleman here. So let's do you, sir, first. If you could stand up and tell us who you are and where you're from, and then if somebody could get to the gentleman here, and then I'm going to go to the gentleman over there. Okay, so you first, sir. Yep. And who your question is for?
Sure. So my name is Carl Mallon from XDI. Thanks for the great panel. Thanks for Lisbon for hosting us. But the question is actually to Kirsten and Paul. You've both talked about disruption, and as you know, as has been pointed out, we're going to see some stranding of assets in our cities. Now, I guess I'm just asking about what you think our stomach for disruption is, because disruption creates losers as well as winners, and that's very difficult when you have a lot of incumbency. And if we look at, for example, how a city changes, there are going to be parts of the city where there's going to be property devaluation or loss of asset value. And when we do that, it creates discomfort. And I'm wondering about, for example, a company like IBM, do you have the stomach for some of those consequences coming from your technology? Or Kirsten, if could that become politically uncomfortable for European governments?
Okay, we're going to hold that right there, and then I'm just going to take that second question as well, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that question.
Hello, my name's Ken Dowse from Southern Cross University in Australia. I guess my question is really to Kirsten and Paul as well, but to the panel in general. The thought that, quite rightly so, that the cities are a solution for climate change and needs to be the focus. But I think I'd just like to raise the parallel thought with that, is that while that is the case, is there a danger that we might lose realisation that as that happens, the resources for those cities, the lifeblood of those cities is really the regions, the non-urban areas away from those cities. And there may be a danger that if we focus only on the cities, that we lose the bigger picture and the survivability as a result.
Wow, great. Okay, Kirsten.
So let me start straight away with that one, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. In fact, the deep demonstrations call that I just mentioned has 8 different areas, and they are all Every one of them is looking to work back from major systems transformations we want to work on and build a whole portfolio. And several of them are precisely on regions because of the deeply interdependent relationship between regions and communities in cities, but also between regions, peri-urban areas, and core agricultural practices. In fact, it links to the reference that Benedicta made also to different cultural perceptions. One of the most challenging things we have around culture, for example, is our relationship and our perception of land and forests and trees, and the way we could use them as carbon sinks. Between the north and south of Europe, we have fundamentally different cultural views on the way forests should be managed and how they play a role in what we're trying to do. So definitely regions and cities in dialogue with one another. My greatest concern is that we're not thinking nearly systemically enough, and we need to really quickly retrain our way of thinking from kind of deep systems understandings outwards, and then the way in which that manifests into everything.
Can we just sorry, if that's all right, I want to come back and deal with that question separately, because that has its importance. Can we just then keep on this question?
Yeah,
Paul, did you want to come?
Sure, just really quickly. I guess when I was using the term cities, that's for me a proxy for regions. And I think of, for instance, in Seattle, really thinking about the region from Portland to Vancouver, BC as a region and thinking about it at that scale. And certainly the supply chain and supply lines that are necessary for preserving a functioning city touches upon all over the world, really, right? So I think someone said in the city is the preservation of the wild, right? And I think if we can figure out how to have functioning low-impact cities, that can really help alleviate a lot of stress on the supply chain aspects of that.
Thank you for your concise and brief answers. I want to try and get as many questions. Diane, I think you wanted to also respond to that question.
I would answer you that, on the contrary, by focusing on cities, we are trying to also convince cities, and it is one of the principles, that they have to be connected to the basin. And in fact, cities are much more stronger than we think, and they perfectly understand that if they do nothing, they won't have any water coming to them. So they are, on the contrary, they are very good actors in order to have a global vision with all the region, because they perfectly understand how they are linked to the water and water resources. And what we see is that they are much more involved, and we put them, and we have a specific, in IWA, specific topic on connecting cities to their basin and being an actors, because they understand it perfectly. They know that if they do nothing, they won't have any more water. I mean, the water is coming from the basin. So I think, on the contrary, they can be very good and very strong actors in order to protect the regional situation.
Now, let's come back to that first question about disruption and political discomfort. I think that's a really interesting dilemma and reality that was highlighted there.
Yes, what is our stomach for disruption? Well, that's a very good question. You would think that if we didn't have much stomach for disruption, we'd be doing a hell of a lot more about climate change a lot faster. I think it cuts several ways. Yes, the kinds of adaptation and business model renewal, transformation changes we're talking about, transformations to kind of almost all aspects of the way we live, we work, we play, we move, and we travel, will be deeply disruptive in a negative sense. They could and can and are already deeply disruptive in a positive sense, unlocking all sorts of possibilities. I'm always puzzled by the fact that we have almost created a semi-cult of adoration around the disruption of digital transformations, and we admire the businesses, well, we do and we don't, the businesses that have produced radical transformations in life because of their digital technologies, and yet we associate climate change in some sense with a different kind of disruption. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that we are wise to think like that. The two elements I would have to bring particularly, and I would hook to the governance question, is think about a parallel between the situation we face now, whether you're an industry or a city or a regional government, and say asbestos claims. In 30 years from now, the grown-up children protesting in front of our parliaments are going to come and look at the documents that we have recording showing that we know perfectly well the implications of the decisions that we are taking to either lock ourselves into carbon emissions or to not adapt in time. And they will have mechanisms to come and start to ask for retribution, at least forgiveness, apologies, some sense of justice, and beginning to think more in terms of the liability and the responsibility we bear in the future, applying something like the example of the Welsh Law of Generations, and bringing that sense of responsibility so the disruption you buy into now is significantly less than a disruption you would otherwise be investing in as a set of costs.
On disruption, so before I joined Microsoft, I worked for a water utility for 20 plus years and was intrigued about disruption, right? But it's one thing to disrupt the CD market or the cassette market with CDs, and then disrupt CDs with streaming audio. It's a whole nother thing to disrupt a sector that provides an essential service for humanity, right? And so I think I do agree that there can be some cavalier quality to disruption, and sort of there's an altar maybe upon which disruption is placed. But I think what's really critical is if you're thinking about disruption and transformation for key sectors that are fundamental to life, you have to think about a soft landing and how to sort of cushion that disruption. So it's not coming in and eviscerating VD, I came, I saw, conquered sort of approach, but rather how do you transform, disrupt that sector while still ensuring that essential service is delivered, right? And so I think there's a responsibility to think about the context in which you're exploring disruption.
We might come back to that, because I think Kirsten might have something to say about that. Right, let's have some hands. I'm conscious. Right, yes, the lady here, the gentleman here, and the lady at the very back. So the lady here. Sorry, I was pointing to a lady. Yes, there we go.
Helena Alegre from LANEC, National Civil Engineering Laboratory here in Lisbon. My question goes to Diane Darras, and maybe to Paul, not so much for his current position, but taking into account his previous position in Seattle Public Utilities. We are all aware of the importance of the cities. We are all aware of the importance of adapting, making our systems, our services more resilient. But we need to take into account that water services, water, wastewater, stormwater services are made of assets that have long duration. They are prepared to last for 100 years or, well, many decades. So this means that we use them for a shorter period. We are just wasting resources, replacing for systems that have other drivers, other motivations. We need to change our current systems. So how to cope with that? We need to understand that whenever we change, whenever we need to replace whatever assets that is aged, we need to rethink. We need to take these type of issues into account. So my question to you, I'd like to ask you to elaborate a little bit about how to enable this transition so that it really takes the benefit of the existing resources. What is the role of, for instance, regulators, public policies in these? So this is the question for you.
Thank you very much indeed. Just before we come to answer that, there was a gentleman with his hand up there. Yes, I thought it was you, sir. Can we hear your question? And just for time's sake, I'm also going to take the lady at the very back as well.
Right, thank you very much. I'm Sébastien Mouret from Global Water Intelligence in Oxford. And my question is predominantly for Mrs. Darras. Your presentation focused mostly on water supply with some wastewater treatment briefly mentioned, but one major aspect of climate change that has to be adapted for as well is very heavy rainfall and sudden rainfall. And so how do IWA members and the IWA itself envision their action in terms of that stormwater management?
And the lady at the very back, please.
Hi, I'm Susanna Fisher from Climate Kick. I think what we see in research with communities or local and national policymakers is it's often very difficult to manage the trade-offs between shorter and longer timeframes. So I think I was wondering, in this context of business adapting, do we see something unique about the way businesses make decisions, that they're able to manage those trade-offs in new ways, or anything we can learn for other sectors about how organizational cultures manage to the trade-offs between longer, medium, and longer-term timeframes?
Who wants to kick off on that one?
I can make.
Okay.
On that last
Claudia.
question, I can make one comment, quick comment. What we have seen is decision is more and more affected by investors' pressure, and investors are, I would say, at least for the corporate businesses, investors are who really is driving the topic in boards. So I would say that they are being the ones that are doing the most work. Now, what we also have seen is that companies are trying to implement some tools like carbon pricing, for example, in their decision, and this is for us, from what we have seen, a good way to start having on the decision process information that integrates the impacts on the environment of certain decisions. I would say that these are the two main aspects that I would like to refer. The investors' pressure, and maybe just complement with there's certain pressure for disinvestment in certain sectors, for example. So this is something that if you know that your investor has assumed an external commitment of reducing its portfolio in certain businesses, then you will start integrating that way of management in your company.
What about the regulation question that the First Lady talked about? Kirsten, is that something you want to talk about? Okay, yes, Diane?
Yeah, okay, yeah. I think the question which was raised by Elena is how do we adapt to something which is unsecured, in fact. It's true that when we started our career 40 years ago, when we had to make an investment, we were looking at what was the increase of consumption, what was the every 20 years demand, in order to say, well, I have to make a reservoir. It was the same for rainwater. We had some long-term statistic. One of the difficulties is what will be reality in 20 years. So we have to do today investment with a lack of evaluation of the situation in 20 years. So it's much more complex. So probably we need to introduce some flexibility, saying that we invest and we should make some resilience scenarios.
Like a mobility.
Yeah, it's not so easy because when you put a pipe in the city, we just like to open it again and again, and so it's quite complex because there is more uncertainty on something which has to be planned for 20 or 50 years, and the amortization is on long term. So it's introduced difficulties. That's why I think the regulation, having in a water system regulators, which is looking at long-term vision, when the utility has to manage every day, repair, and do and justify, we need that equilibrium between long-term vision, and I don't think that utilities are short-term, but they have to manage their price, so we need to have that, and having good regulation and regulators, and Portugal, in fact, has shown that a good regulator, and introducing a regulator in water was really useful. And I always give the example of Portugal when around. There are other regulators in Italy and things like that. So regulation can be a way to introduce in between the utility, the consumer, having a kind of long-term vision and helping the long-term vision, because otherwise it's quite complex to equilibrate between the short term, the adaptation and things like that, and a 20 or 30 or 50 years. So you can have that. I don't know
But
if
the
I'm clear.
reality is that that needs political will. It's not just going to happen.
Well, a regulator is designed by a political will.
Yes,
You introduce
that's what
a
I mean.
regulator in a country if there is a political will, although normally the regulator has to be independent.
Yes, but before
But the
they can
idea
be
of
warned.
having regulators
Yeah.
and introducing regulators, I think it is up to, on my opinion, it's key, and IWA is clearly pushing the introduction of regulation and regulators, because in a monopoly, because water is a monopoly and as energy, you need to have people representing long term, and again, representing our kids and the future generation interest. So you need to put inside your organization someone who is looking at long term and able to hear that. And of course, it has to be a political will at the beginning to create. That's true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think with adaptation, it's clear the implications are that all the systems that we manage are going to have to adapt, right? And that includes our regulatory environment. To have a fixed, rigid system in light of a changing climatic conditions, hydrologic conditions, is a mismatch, right? And so I think we need to be exploring how our regulatory systems can also accommodate and not impede the adaptation measures that are needed to manage our water systems. And to the point about stormwater, I think that's flies under the radar. It's not focused on as much as water supply. It will have a huge impact on quality of life in cities. It's a very expensive infrastructure, typically underground in dense areas, so it's expensive to replace. I think the water-wise approach of looking at land use as a part of the stormwater management puzzle is really important. And I think the impacts around the mental health stressors around flooding, the fact that diseases are often, outbreaks will accompany flooding is another aspect that, again, is not really addressed quite as much. So I think it's a different thing than water supply, but it's one that needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you. And in fact, the question was particularly addressed to you, wasn't it?
It's true that I didn't in 10 minutes had time to speak about that, although I show that Portugal and some other cities have been facing that kind of things. It's clear that there is also on rainfall and being intelligent, we need to reduce the way we built our cities. I mean, you have to introduce more green infrastructure, which is how are you managing that the water doesn't flow so quickly in the city and can go inside. I mean, reducing the fact that the impermeabilization of the cities. And there are lots of technology now which are helping even the roof of the city, of the houses, where you put green on your roof. So there is lots of green infrastructure which can help to avoid that. However, I mean, if you have suddenly the river will overflow, I mean, it's more the infrastructure before the city, because many cities are receiving water which are not coming from themselves, but much. So it's a kind of, and there are lots of things to do. Mapping, early warning. I do believe I said that digital technology can really help, because of course it won't avoid, but if people know that it is coming, you can have early warning and be able to adapt and be more intelligent, because you know it's going to come. So I think we can both go to infrastructure, what I said, green technology and digital. I think it's three big topics to develop and push on rainwater, on water, and wastewater. I mean, it's not really different in all the sectors.
Kirsten, you wanted to?
Just wanted to build on that. That's in fact a significant part of the work that we support is precisely in nature-based solutions, is very much on water supply, because again, between North and South of Europe, you have, and kind of in the very mixed, uncertain changes that are happening across the Mediterranean as well. That's a huge part of it. And I would push it upstream to design. So as if you think about one of Europe's greatest challenges of the retrofit of physical buildings and the entire urban infrastructure, and this question about how do we plan for and design for redundancy and resilience. So we've designed for multiple options. Take a leaf out of the book of antibodies and the way in which your immune systems work, and design physical infrastructure in similar ways. A lot of the work that we're seeing in biomimicry is particularly powerful in thinking about how we take organic design into the way we do physical infrastructure design. I also wanted to add one thing on this question of short and long-term trade-offs and the question of regulation. I think there are some interesting analogies in thinking about what happened with the financial crisis on starting to define particular industries, businesses, regions as being systemically important, or assets as being systemically important, and therefore requiring an investment in a longer-term horizon than as part of their natural governance process. But that can also come bottom-up, both from within in industry and within, say, citizen science mechanisms. An early warning on, say, combination of drones and satellite data on early warning is very good. But also key tipping points like insurance. A lot of my work in the past has been working within insurance and the insurance industry, investing in, say, advanced manufacturing in 4 dimensions that uses the properties of the material to world to change itself when water and wind conditions change, to reduce the underlying risk, literally stop houses have their roof blown open or stop houses being flooded. And that is incredibly aligned to the needs of a financial industry that simply won't be able to insure because the cost is too great. So investing in the innovation in infrastructure that changes the risk in the first place becomes a financial investment, and that translates up into industry self-managed industry standards as well as imposed regulation.
Thank you very much for adding that. I think it was evoked briefly by the Commissioner yesterday. Of course, that's a huge aspect of things. You mentioned stewardship in your presentation. I think that's also a very important thing, and I think it marries up with the wisdom part, because it has got to be a collaboration and a consensual way forward, both on the micro and the macro. Unfortunately, time is up, which I regret, because I would have loved to continue the conversation. But I think you're all staying on, so perhaps the conversation can continue throughout the day. You would welcome people coming up to you, and so I'm sorry you haven't had more time, but everybody here is very approachable and will be here later on. So if you'd like to approach them and ask them and have a conversation with them, that, thank you very much indeed, will be possible. Before we close, I'd like to say that for those of you attending the dinner tonight, there's going to be an electric bus waiting for us that will be outside at 6 p.m. at the front of the building to take us to the LX factory. I'd also encourage you and remind you, please, to vote on the app for the awards that are going to be given tomorrow. So for the student posters, which, by the way, I'm told will be available online, I think, today and tomorrow, up until the vote. And it's about artwork and verbal communication as well, are the things you can vote for. And I very much look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning for the closing plenary. That will be after lunch, not our 9 a.m. Usual meeting. And of course, that'll be concentrating on the road ahead. Meanwhile, I hope you at nighttime are enjoying Portugal life. There's lots of restaurants out there, there are lots of sights to see, and if you haven't been popped into the monastery, I strongly recommend it for a moment of calm, quiet reflection on maybe why we're here and what we're doing with this planet. Thank you very much indeed to our speakers, and please help me to thank them very much for their contributions today, and thank you for your... Thank you so much.